Captain Bob and Me. This should be regarded as a separate book to Robert Maxwell as I knew him. The latter book is out of print, blasted. Captain Bob and Me has been appreciated by a hell of a lot of readers. It is a witty and often startling account of my 23-year-old friendship with the late mirror magnet, including my brief theory about the reason behind his unexpected death. To save time, my theory is that on one of his many excursions to the back of his yacht, the Lady Guylaine, to watch the wash in the small hours of the morning, he had a massive heart attack. It is known that he was overweight. In the book, I account for many meetings and much hospitality from Bob and his wife, Betty, over the years, ever since I was introduced to him at a lavish birthday party at his home, Headington Hill Hall in Oxford. This was in 1968. After that, I regularly spent weekends with the Maxwells, Bob, Betty, and whatever children were in the house. I worked for him, i.e. for the Labour Party, although I took the train to London on polling day. Once in London, I voted Tory. I then took the return train to Milton Keynes and drove Labour Party supporters to the polls in my late brother Adrian's car, much to his displeasure. I have told many anecdotes, both personal and private. Bob played an earth-shatteringly large role in my life from my teens until shortly before he died. He even rescued me from a hospital which was doing me serious harm. I was given ECT, which was totally inappropriate and which could have caused me permanent brain damage. Bob stormed into the operating theatre and said, "Turn that fucking machine off." And he uttered more somewhat fruity language. Ribald black humour reigns throughout this book, and I hope I have provided insight into a larger-than-life interpretation of such a controversial man. Now we come to the story blurbs on the back of the book, and there are a few comments about my books, but not all my books. One book is entitled "Stop the Car, Mr. Beckett," formerly "The Rendon Boy to the Grave is Gone." And the reviewer has said, "Makes for passionate and fascinating reading, as strange and as entertaining as all the books which came out before it." That is Dana Evans of the Bristol Evening Post. Another book quoted on the back cover, "Never Alone with Rex Malone." This is a black comedy about Robert Maxwell's relationship with a sex-crazed and thuggish funeral director. And unfortunately, it is out of print. Open quotes, "A ribald, ambitious black comedy, a story which is courageously and powerfully told." Stuart Stephen, The Daily Mail. Open quotes, "I was absolutely flabbergasted when I read it!" Exclamation mark, close quotes, Robert Maxwell. Now we come to some anecdotes. The first anecdote goes this way. Ever since Bob rescued me from a loony bin in 1969, I decided I would pay him back for his kindness. I decided to write a novel in which he appeared as the main character. a character whom I idolized. Bob spoke to someone once and said, "Eleanor loves me very much because I saved her life." I started writing straight away, but had to destroy all my manuscripts. Finally, I completed the book in 1985. The book's title was Never Alone with Rex Malone. The story is a fantasy story, and in it, all the way through, was coverage of Robert Maxwell's relationship with a highly sexed, utterly thuggish funeral director. Apart from idolizing Bob, I intended to show the difference between good and evil. I put a lot of necrophilia into the book. Then came the crisis. The time had come for me to send the manuscript to Bob. Instead, I sent it round to his son, Ian, who is a great friend of mine, and asked him if he could hand it over to Bob, whom he was spending the weekend with. Will he allow me to publish? Will he refuse to let me publish? For the following week, before I was due to spend the weekend at Headington Hill Hall, I could not eat and I barely slept. I got into my silver Ford Escort and drove down the M40 at speeds of 110 miles an hour. Before I reached Headington Hill Hall, I stopped off at a pub and ordered a large gin and tonic, irrespective of the drink-driving laws. I left the pub and stampeded through Headington until I reached Headington Hill Hall. I was even more terrified that Bob would refuse me permission for me to publish Never Alone with Rex Malone. Bob employed an absolutely half-witted butler whom he addressed in irony as Genius. I had had quite a lot to drink, and I could feel myself slurring my words a little. Genius opened the front door and said, "Mr. Maxwell will see you on the lawn," whereupon I completely lost my head. I did not wish to be lectured in a hostile manner by Bob about pornography and necrophilia. I panicked and rushed upstairs and immersed myself in a freezing cold bath. I heard Bob speaking out of the window in his wonderfully deep voice. "Where is Eleanor Berry, Genius?" I just managed to hear Genius saying she went upstairs to have a bath. The next word I heard was, "Why?" uttered in an even deeper voice than before. I got out of the bath, got dressed, put some makeup on, and hurried downstairs onto the lawn where Bob was waiting for me. The rather untidy manuscript lay open on his knee. He continued to smoke a cigar. I approached him from behind, and I put my hand on his shoulder. He always allowed me to do this. "Hello, Bob," I ventured. He turned towards me, still chewing his unlit cigar. "Hello, Eleanor," he replied. "There's something I must ask you, Bob." "Which is what, sweetie?" "Well, the book which I asked Ian to show you. Have you read it yet?" "Yes, Eleanor." "I'm referring to the book called Never Alone with Rex Malone. You will have no doubt gathered by now that the character Rex Malone is based entirely on you." Bob suddenly roared with laughter. "Then I take it you are enjoying it," I said. "Do I have your permission to get it published?" "If you want to know my reaction to your book, I was absolutely flabbergasted by it," exclaimed Bob. "Why were you flabbergasted?" I asked nervously. "Because you made me a sort of central figure surrounded by gravediggers, crooked funeral directors, necrophiliacs, and God knows what else. Your book is totally perverse, but you said some very nice things about me. Who's publishing it?" "Weidenfeld," I said. Ian happened to be walking past Bob and me. He was about to dive into the swimming pool. He had a really colourful bathing suit on. "Well done," he called out. "You can't go wrong with George." Incidentally, George Weidenfeld was about the most crooked publisher in London. I came into Bob's office one morning during one of the campaigns on which I was working for him. He had a man in there with him. I knew who the man was, but I didn't speak to him because I didn't like the look of him. He was unattractive and chinless. I'll hand it to him that this was not his fault, however. Bob pointed at him a bit disrespectfully and said, "Do you know who this man is?" "I haven't the faintest idea who he is," I replied, my voice raised. "Does he work in your garden?" Bob laughed and turned to the man once more. "She doesn't mean to be offensive. She's just a bit shy." The man was irritated and spoke with a heavy Yorkshire accent. Shy, bloody abrupt, I'd say." It was Arthur Scargill. We come to the second anecdote. During one of the election campaigns, when I was working for Bob, everyone moved into a place called the Wharf House, which overlooked a stagnant canal, and it was near the Labour Party's headquarters. I was not all that industrious and spent the mornings in bed sleeping. Occasionally I was stirred by the sound of vigilant campaigners calling, "Vote while you can, Maxwell's your man," over loud hailers. The Maxwells had an Irish cleaning woman. I think her name was Mrs. Mock. I was unaware at the time that Bob spent a lot of the mornings in Wharf House. One morning I was rumbled. From 8 o'clock in the morning onwards, I was woken at 15-minute intervals by Mrs. Mock's shrill Irish accent. "Mr. Maxwell says it's high time you were hopping out of your bed. He thinks you've been there quite long enough." I ignored her visits. At 12:30, the great man himself rattled into the bedroom. He came up to me and sat on his haunches like a policeman asking a motorist whether he had been drinking. He leant forward, his face less than a foot away from mine. I was struck by the extreme sweetness of his breath. He pointed first at me, then at the ceiling. For some reason, I suddenly thought of the film A Clockwork Orange, which I had recently seen. I quoted a line from it, "Leave us be and I'll be right as Dodgers for this after." Bob appeared irritated. "You up," he shouted. After that, he made me sleep on a camp bed in his study. Early in the morning, I used to watch him working at his desk without his knowledge. He was sitting in profile, with his tie loosened at the neck. This was something which set my blood on fire. I loved to lie on the camp bed looking at him, and the thing which excited me most was the fact that he had no idea he was being watched. The experience was similar to the thrill of a nature watcher observing a fierce wild animal which thinks it is alone. Third anecdote. I was doing my A-levels in English, French and Russian, the year the Maxwells very kindly said I could stay in their house, namely Headington Hill Hall, free of board and lodging. They let me stay there for a whole year. I had been thrown out of the YWCA because I had sent the Communist Party round to its humorous proprietress as a practical joke. Her name was Miss Bloxham. Sometimes after dinner, Bob gave me some secretarial work to do. This was easy because all his letters were short, although he dictated quite fast and I couldn't keep up with him. "For Christ's sake, slow down, Bob. I shouted suddenly. I noticed that he looked excited, puzzled, and startled at the same time. He smiled a bit strangely and then tilted his head backwards. "Are you all right, Bob?" I asked. There was a silence. Then he said, "You are without doubt a truly terrifying human being." I shall never forget his words. They have haunted me to this day. And now we come to the fourth anecdote. Open quotes, "Let's read Pravda together at the kitchen table," said Bob one Saturday morning. Now, Pravda, Pravda, is a Russian newspaper, and it is the mouthpiece of the communist elite. I was then at university reading English. It was 1974, at the time of President Nixon and Watergate. I don't know how Bob managed to get a copy of Pravda. All the same, the editorial was worded in such a way that we were both in stitches. Apparently, at that time, the author of Pravda's interminable editorials was paid 10 rubles a word, according to Bob. I've no idea how he knew this. Anyway, we found out through reading Pravda's editorial that the Soviet government under Leonid Brezhnev was so scared of Nixon's alleged insanity that the newspaper's editorial ended this way, in bold capitals: "Pravda thinks that the American people are being very rude and very unkind to their beloved president." Now we come to the fifth anecdote. One Saturday, when I was staying at Headington Hill Hall, I felt very ill indeed, because one of my doctors, whom I will not name, completely cut off my Valium supply. I had been taking 60 milligrams of Valium at night to help me sleep. Suddenly, this doctor refused to give me any at all. As a result, I felt desperately ill. I was with Bob's wife, Betty, in the drawing room at Headington Hill Hall. It was lunchtime. She was surprised by her husband's lateness, and she asked me to accompany her to the offices of Pergamon Press to tell him lunch was ready. He came out of the building and, as usual, was very friendly towards me. He said to Betty, "Why don't you ever tell me when Eleanor's coming to stay? I would be able to look forward to it." It was perishingly hot. The date was the 28th of July, 1983, when my nephew, Bingo, my elder sister's son, was born. Bob's sexual chemistry was such that I sometimes fainted in front of him. I looked him in the eye when he came out of the building. His eyes were hypnotic and locked me into a stare which I could not break. I fainted once more. I was lying on my back in the grass outside the offices of Pergamon Press. Bob was kneeling in the grass beside me. He was shaking me by the shoulders. Because I was lying down and he was kneeling by my side, I lost my grip on reality. I assumed automatically that he was a doctor. For some reason, I rolled up my sleeve and asked him to give me a typhoid injection. "You're ill," he said confrontationally. "No, I'm not," I lied. "I'm extremely worried about the kind of company you are keeping in London," he said obscurely. Incidentally, it took me 6 weeks to withdraw completely from Valium. Sixth anecdote, coming up. I was doing a translation job for a firm in Oxford, using French and Russian. The hours were long, 8:30 till 5:30. For a short period, I shared a flat with a very selfish woman who prevented me from using the bathroom between 7 o'clock and 9 o'clock. The Maxwells allowed me to go to Headington Hill Hall early every weekday and use their majestic bathroom. It was a cold, foggy morning. The time was 7 o'clock. I had a hangover and had slept badly because the odious woman I shared a flat with had blared a transistor radio for most of the night. I threw a boot at the radio, but to no avail. As a result, I was totally disorientated on arriving at Headington Hill Hall. I was surprised to see Bob leaving his house at 7 o'clock in the morning, and as I was barely awake, I made the following utterly fatuous remark. "Hello, fancy seeing you here." "I live here, don't I?" said Bob. Now we come to the next anecdote. I think it's the 7th anecdote. And this anecdote is suitable only for persons aged 18 and over, and it is entitled Robert Maxwell, the Irishman, and the Bottle of Wine. Here goes. The Maxwells gave me a birthday lunch. It was my 23rd birthday. Most of the family were there. A tedious row was taking place between Isabel, Christine's twin sister, and her younger sister, Guylaine, Bob's favourite child. Bob's youngest child. Bob became bored and turned to me. "What year were you born?" he asked. I took 3 years off my age, as any woman would. "All right, I'm going down to the wine cellar to find a bottle of wine for that year. I bet you won't be able to drink the whole bottle in one go." "I never say no to a dare." "I bet I will," I said. He went down to the wine cellar and brought back a dusty-looking bottle of red wine. He opened it and teasingly put it out of my reach. I saw this as being a game. I leant across him to get hold of the bottle. He gave me a smack on the back of my hand and said, "Don't be so impatient, missy." Shortly afterwards, he filled my glass with the wine, and when I drank it, he filled my glass again. He continued to do this until the bottle was empty. "I bet you can't stand up and make a speech," he said eventually. "No problem, Bob," I said. I was euphoric, and the alcohol I had consumed made me show off. I stood up with an effort and rested my hands on the back of my chair. I felt nauseated and was terrified I was going to be sick. Fortunately, I wasn't. "I'm now going to tell you a hilarious joke," I said. "Get on with it then," said Bob. So I told the joke, which goes as follows. An Irishman went to a job centre. "Where did you last work?" they asked him. "In a mortuary," said the Irishman. "Why did you leave?" they asked. "I was fired," said the Irishman. "Why were you fired?" they said. "For bunging the corpses down onto the slab instead of laying them gently, and after laying them down, for fucking them from behind." There was a deadly silence at the Maxwell's table. I looked at his son Ian, who was sitting opposite Bob. He looked pissed off. I looked at Bob, whose appearance shocked me terribly. Fortunately, Betty did not understand the thick Irish accent I mimicked, nor did Guylaine. Bob turned green and began to sweat. There was a mild tremor in his hands. I'd have to use the magnifying glass. I wouldn't be seen dead in glasses. There was a slight tremor in his hands. He then rang a bell. Oping, O-P-I-N-G, the Filipino cook, bustled into the room. Wait for it, folks. Are you all right, Mr. Maxwell? She asked. Bob clutched the table and rose unsteadily to his feet. Yes, he said. Mr. Maxwell, do you need help? Asked Opie. Yes. I am going to my room where I wish to be given some hot sweet tea, said Bob in the tone of an out-of-work undertaker. He staggered out of the dining room, supporting himself with the edge of the table. I looked at Ian once more. He walked over to where I was standing. Don't you dare ever again speak to my dad about necrophilia, he said furiously. I had certainly blotted my copybook that weekend, but the kindly Maxwells never failed to invite me back to their house. And the 8th anecdote goes this way. I've got a phobia about illness, both in myself and in those dear to me. It was a Saturday morning. Bob and I were in the offices of Pergamon Press. Bob was drinking coffee and I was drinking tea. You don't need 5 cubes of sugar in your tea, he said. You'll make yourself ill. Another thing, take your spoon out of your cup when you finish stirring your tea. And then he said, what are you studying at the moment? And I said, hold on, I've got to use the bloody magnifying glass again. What are you studying at the moment? I told him that my major subject was English, but that I had to do contextual courses on philosophers as well, and big-time boys like Proust, Nietzsche, and bloody Virginia Woolf. At present, I had been writing an essay on À la recherche du temps perdu, which could not be by anyone other than Proust. Bob and I spoke for a while about the agonizing multi-tomed blockbuster which this self-indulgent Frenchman had penned. I had cheated when I wrote my essay. I read a synopsis of the rambling, quotes, masterpiece, close quotes, in English. However, I was able to hold an intelligent conversation with Bob. I said, it just doesn't make any sense, a boy continuously sending messages from his bedroom to his mother's cook just to find out whether his mother loved him and would be coming to see him later on. Why the hell should this boy be so concerned about whether his mother loves him or not? Quite apart from that, Proust goes on and on about some crappy old biscuit most of the way through the bloody book. Bob laughed. I continued, keeping to the matter in hand. Surely the wretched boy's only logical motive for sending the messages to the cook would be prompted by his terror that his mother had been taken ill. Why do you say that, Bob? Said Bob. He leant back in his chair and cleared his throat loudly. He always sounded like a gang of Hell's Angels trying to start their motorbikes when he did this. It's simple, Bob, I said. It stands to reason. A child wouldn't be interested in whether or not his mother loved him. He would be much more worried about her imminent demise. The only thing going through the boy's mind the whole time would be the fear not of rejection, but of bereavement. Oh, bollocks, said Bob. Enjoy your read.